just right here.
Okay?
We're live.
Okay, shalom.
Shalom.
Welcome to the practical Parsha for Parshat KiTeizei. KiTeizei la milchama al oivecha. If you should go out to war against your enemies, and Hashem your God puts them in your hand, or He will put them in your hand, and you shall capture a captive, a prisoner. Okay? Now, the truth is that I am almost certain that you've heard this already, but the lesson in this verse is so powerful that it's absolutely worthwhile to go over it again. And this lesson, I must say, applies practically, not just in war, but in any quote-unquote battles that we have in life. And those battles include almost any challenges we deal with in life, whether it's relationships, whether it's our work, whether it's business, whether it's dealings with people, whether on a business level, on a social level, on a religious level. There are so many things in our lives that really and legitimately constitute war. They require, it's a fight. It's not easy. It's a fight. However, the Torah is teaching us how one can conquer that, how one can deal with issues. How is that? That was page 511. How do you deal with it? So if you look at the verse, there's something very peculiar that immediately stands out. Now you didn't notice it in the English translation, because the English translation already has been, so to speak, corrected to make sense. But if you look at the actual verse, if you read it in Hebrew, or I should translate it literally, this is what it says. If you shall go out to war on your enemies, or over your enemies. It doesn't say against your enemies. It means against your enemies. That's when you go out to war. But it says on your enemies. And Hashem will give him in your hand, will put them in your hand, and you will capture its captive. So now you see, the question becomes, why does it say on your enemies, over your enemies, versus saying if you should go to war with your enemies, or as it says here, against your enemies? That makes sense. Secondly, why does it say, and you will capture its captive? You should say, you shall capture a prisoner or a person, right? Capturing a captive means that even before your captivity of that entity, that person, it was already in captivity. What's going on over here? This is a lesson in life, both in our spiritual and our material life. There are many things in life that come up, that pop up, that cause us great stress, distress, and worry. And we have to fight. We have to fight. There are battles. We have little battles, big battles. We have battles in life. And what the Torah is teaching us, that the approach, the attitude has to be, and why would I want us to have this attitude? Because if you really want to ensure the second half of the verse, which is that Hashem will surely defeat the enemy, undo the problem, and give it in your hands, meaning you're going to capture it, you're going to be bigger than it and overpower it, the way you set out to deal with the problem will be the guarantee for that. And how is that? You go out with the attitude, you approach the problem with the attitude that I am above the problem. Not arrogance. Let's not confuse that with arrogance. But when I'm going out to war over an enemy, whatever the enemy is, he or she or it, whatever the situation is, I have to always have this developed attitude that I am over it. It's just a test. It's just a challenge. It's just something there that Hashem put in my way for me to overcome, for me to show my strength, not necessarily to show my strength to Hashem, but to prove to myself the strength that I really have, that I've never tapped into and therefore may have not realized. And then you also merit the end of the verse, which is you will capture its captive. What does it mean to capture its captive? What it means, the sages explain, that even before you capture it, it's really something that all along belonged to you. All along was really yours, but it was in captivity by the enemy. What you're really doing is you're just capturing it back. In this context that the Torah is speaking about, literally, we're talking about a lost Jewish soul that seems to be now not Jewish, and you have now an opportunity to attract it back. So it's really been all these years, unbeknownst to itself maybe, in captivity. And you are now taking it out of its captivity. You're ejecting it from its captivity. By you capturing it, you're really capturing it back. Okay, and that's why he says, that's why he refers to it as a captive. You're going to capture its captive versus saying you capture its prisoner. Capturing a prisoner means it really belongs there, and I am imprisonating it. Capturing its captive means it's been in captivity there all along, and I am now recapturing it. And that is the same, by the way, when we have an issue, when we have a challenge. You know, they say, what doesn't break you makes you, and that is so true. It's not just a cliche. And really, most of the time, I'm not going to say that there aren't extenuating circumstances where really, for reasons that we don't understand, Hashem sometimes gives us something which seems to be a burden larger than we can handle. But in your typical case, in your day-to-day life, and no one should ever, God forbid, have worse than that, all the challenges that arise, all the problems, all even the mishaps, the misfortunes sometimes that we have to endure during our lives, are really there to make us stronger. And they're really there to return to us a captive. What's a captive? An element of ourselves that hasn't been with us. It hasn't been glowing. It hasn't been shining. It hasn't been active. And as if it's been captive in the enemy's side. And now Hashem does that to trigger our inner strength. And then if we take advantage of it and we capitalize on it, we bring it out and we realize, wow, I can do that. We realize, wow, I'm bigger than that. I'm bigger than that temptation. I'm bigger than that challenge. I'm bigger than that bad boss. Or that, difficult customer, whatever it is. Or I'm even bigger than my own short-temperedness. I'm bigger than, I can rise above, my own short fuse. I can rise above my own, let's just say sometimes if a person has somewhat of a, passive attitude or apathetic attitude, and I can become more sympathetic. I realize that situation calls out for me to be more forgiving, more considerate. This is something that's been captive all these years. I didn't realize that I have it. And because Hashem put me to the challenge, now I suddenly realize it, and wow, it can come back out. Of course, what's very crucial here is my attitude, and that I have to do the fighting. Hashem is not going to do the fighting for you. Hashem doesn't wage that war for you. He gives us the ability and the potential to win it, but we have to win it. We have to be the ones to actually fight the fight. To actually, as we say, with boots on the ground, to actually in the trenches to make it happen. And that's really most of our lives, if we look, most of our challenges, if we really observe them well, most of our problems, most of our situations are all in this category. Okay? It's a little battle, or it's a big battle, but ultimately it's not able to really break us unless we let it break us, unless our attitude is, we're an even playing field. This is as strong as me. Okay? So that's a very, very powerful lesson from this very first verse. And then the Torah goes on to various mitzvot related to the soldier in war. Later it speaks about also one having more than one wife, and about the firstborn, that regardless of the fact you like him or you don't like him, the firstborn is the firstborn. And this is also in code. This can be actually also a very powerful hint, and it's especially crucial as we approach the end of the year, because remember KiTeizei is always read within a few weeks before Rosh Hashanah. That what does it tell us? As Hashem declared that before we left Egypt, Hashem said to Moshe to relay the message to Pharaoh that Israel is my firstborn son. All Jews collectively is like my firstborn son. What is Hashem saying over here? That even when you're not particularly fond of that firstborn, even God forbid if there's a situation that, or there's some circumstances that overshadow that initial love, that special feeling that one should or would have towards their firstborn, still Hashem says you can't do it. You cannot override. You cannot take away from that special. It's great. Now I'm not going to be alone, right? From that special status that the firstborn has, and they get a double portion. Okay, it has nothing to do with them deserving it in the moment. It has nothing to do with them being liked in the moment. Once you achieve the status, what the Torah is saying is that's your status. Okay, and that is never to be changed. Anyway, fast forward to verse 22. Okay, even though on the surface it's obviously a pretty unpleasant discussion, verse 22 and 23. Over here we speak about the unfortunate circumstance of one who's done certain transgressions for which the Beit Din, the court, the Jewish court, would have to put them to death. Okay? Would have to actually, give them the ultimate of penalties, which is capital punishment. And this is only with a certain type of execution. The Torah says, you shall hang him on a tree. Okay? You should hang him on a tree. However, if you look at verse 23, it says, do not leave his corpse overnight on a tree, but you are surely to bury him on that day. For a hanging corpse is an affront to Hashem. And do not defile your land, which Hashem, your God, gives you as territory. What is it saying over here? Practically speaking, in terms of this law, is that they would have to hang the corpse up. Remember, I just want to be sure, there is no such thing as the penalty or of death, the execution by hanging. Okay, according to the Torah, that's forbidden and that's never done. That's not something a Jewish court would do. Well, this is for the purpose of hanging it, I guess, to display it. However, at the same time that we're dealing with somebody who but certainly was a sinner, somebody who committed a sin, to such a degree that even the court of law, okay, with all all attempts to find merit and to try to absolve the person could not, obviously, and they had to impose the execution, the capital punishment. Yet, what does the Torah tell us? This body, if it hangs overnight or past night, as I'll detail in a moment, it'll be an affront to God. The sages give us an interesting parable to illustrate this. Hey, what do you mean to be an affront to God? How would it be an affront to God? This person went against God's will. So the sages tell us, imagine two brothers. One was the king, and the other became a highwayman. The other one was the head of the mafia. And finally he was caught, and they hung him. In those days, they would hang him in the middle of the town square, city square. Now anybody who passes says, oh look, the king's hanging. Because he looks identical to the king. They're the same family, same genes, maybe a twin. Thus, Hashem says, man, especially a Jew that has an neshama, that has a soul, is created in my image. If that body hangs too long, it's going to be as if an affront to Hashem. Look, here is a representative of Hashem, a representative of God, the image of God. Even though, of course, God is not limited to the image that we have, a nose and eyes and ears, but even the symbolic image. And therefore, Hashem says you should not leave him for too long. In fact, the way it was done, practically speaking, was they would lift up the body. They would hang the body literally minutes, if not moments, before sunset. And as soon as it was sunset, they would lower it. So now you fulfill the whole mitzvah. You've hung it, but it didn't stay overnight, which begins with, at least, if we can, when, to be on the stricter side, so to speak, to err on the side of caution, it begins with sunset. Now, what's very powerful here? The sages tell us that not only where they bury the body, where they bury the person himself, the corpse, but they would even bury the piece of wood on which he was hung. Lest no one ever say, oh, that's the wood that so-and-so was hung from. That was the pole that he was hung from. It should not in any way be a source, an element of disgrace for that person's memory, or like we say here, for the image of Hashem. Now what this teaches us is something very, very important. This is in fact something that's implemented to a great degree, almost always, okay, when it comes to Jewish circles. When God forbid the time comes, the ultimate time when somebody passes away, which obviously we have absolute no control over, that's only in the hands of the Creator. Hashem decides when a person, it's time to go, it's time to retrieve that soul and bring it back up to heaven. The body, what does it say over here? It should not stay overnight. In fact, this is one of the sources that we have in the Torah for why amongst Jews, traditionally, we try to bury the person almost immediately, within the same day. I should tell you that there are places, very exclusive, in Jerusalem, for example. Not only do they bury it during the same day, they even do burials at night, so that it doesn't stay overnight, literally, as it says over here, you should not defile the soil. It doesn't stay overnight. Even if somebody, God forbid, will pass away on a Shabbat, Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat, they're going to do the funeral. We don't do that here in the diaspora. Just could be because of just practical reasons, because cemeteries are closed and it's governed by, workers, Gentile workers, or whatever it is. But the fact that I'm sharing with you is to illustrate how crucial this is, how important this is. To explain it, we know that the body doesn't find rest. When they say rest in peace, even though it's just, it seems like to be a secular cliche, a secular adage, but the truth is that it does stem from something that originates in truth, that originates in holiness, which is that the body and the soul are still attached. So long that the body has not been buried, so long that we haven't accomplished, fulfilled that which the Torah says that you have to go back to earth, that body has not been returned, so to speak. It has not been, you didn't receive the deposit money back because you haven't made a full return. And therefore the soul is still attached to the body. So imagine that the body still feels pain. We may not appreciate it. Why not? Because to us the person's dead. They don't see, they don't hear, the heart stopped and there's no pulse. True, that is true. But there's still an element of the soul that's attached to the body. Mm-hmm. Only when you finish the kvura, the actual burial, meaning when the sand is laid on the person, or some say even only when you make what's called a tsurat hakever, when you actually shape the mound and it looks now like what a grave is supposed to look like, that's when the soul fully departs. And only now the part that's going to hover, but that's going to be for eternity, over the grave and stay there. That's why we don't step on a grave, because it's holy. Then it stays there. So it's a very interesting thing, because people sometimes go, Rabbi, why is that necessary? I say, no, you have to speed it up. You do it as soon as possible. There's only certain exceptions of reasons when we would delay it. That's only if it's for the honor of the deceased. Let's say they have children coming from afar, or people that have to be present at the funeral, and otherwise if you do it right away, they won't be there, it'll be a small funeral, then sometimes you push it off a day or so. Or sometimes when somebody you had a wish, or the family wishes to have him buried in Israel, for example, in the Holy Land, to have a plot there, or they've expressed a desire to be buried there, then it's in their best interest, in their honor, to be buried in Israel, and that obviously takes time until you fly the body to Israel, and so on and so forth. Any questions? Chapter 22, verse 1. Okay, it's on page 513 in our book. Okay, 513 in our book. This is a very, very important mitzvah. It's a very, very powerful mitzvah. And it's one of those mitzvot, as you'll soon see, that Hashem, so to speak, is personally in charge. Okay, look what it says. You may not observe, you may not witness your brother's ox or his sheep lost and conceal yourself from them. You must surely return them to your brother. Okay? But if your brother is not near you, or you do not know him, you don't know who it is, gather it into your house and let it stay with you until your brother sees it, when you must return it to him. Okay? And so you are to do to his donkey, and you are to do to his garment, and so you are to do for any lost object of your brother's that is lost from him, which you find, you may not conceal yourself. Again, it says you may not conceal yourself. Okay? So literally, what does that mean?
You should not look the other way.
You can say, in your mind, once I retrieve it, and I'm going to explain in a moment, now I have assumed responsibility. Now I have subjected to myself, okay? I have subjected to myself now to all the rules, to all the responsibilities that go along with this mitzvah. But what happens if I just don't notice it? Okay? What does Hashem say? What does Hashem say? Lo tuchal lehitalem. Well, lo tuchal lehitalem, that's the final words of verse 3. The way it's translated here is, you may not conceal yourself. You cannot conceal yourself. But this could also be read, you can't. In other words, for the naked eye, for your fellow human being, you can play what we call in Yiddish your shtick. You can play games and go, oh, really? Oh, I didn't notice it. Oh, what a thing. Oh, I didn't see it. Really, I didn't know. But Hashem says to you,
you know,
because I'm watching you. You know what I mean? I got my eyes there. You know, Hashem's eyes sees everything. And therefore, I'm telling you, not that you shouldn't, but you can't. The word is you can't. You cannot ignore it. Now really, the truth is, it could be quite a challenging mitzvah. That's the truth. It could become challenging because remember, the moment you pick up the object, you have now an obligation to watch over it. In fact, I will tell you that the Talmud goes so far to say, and it proves it actually, that when one is in possession of a lost object, when one is in possession of a lost object waiting for its rightful owner, one now has the same level of responsibility, the same expectation of security as one, follow this, who was paid to watch an object, as a paid watchman. That's a whole subject in the same, a non-paid watchman, a paid watchman. But what's the reason? What is the logic behind this? The Talmud says because this is such a great mitzvah that at least technically speaking, or theoretically, if you were to be approached now to do another mitzvah, you can absolve yourself from doing that other mitzvah because the rule is ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. If one is occupied, if one is actively occupied in doing a mitzvah, one becomes exempt from doing any other mitzvah that will take his or her attention off that mitzvah. So theoretically speaking, it can even save you a lot of money. Somebody comes to your door and says, look, I needed help. I'm sorry, I'm busy watching this object. I can't go anywhere. So you have now a benefit from it. That's a form of pay, says the Talmud. And therefore, you cannot be negligent in any way, and you have to watch that object. Now remember, it could be that the rightful owner may never find out that you owned it, that you found it, and may never find out that you were negligent, and which therefore as a result caused the object to become lost or destroyed. But Hashem knows. So in Hashem's book, not only you didn't do your responsibility, but now you owe that individual, which you may not even know who he is, you owe him money. You owe him money. Because since you become responsible to watch it, you have that obligation, and when you don't fulfill that obligation, then you have to pay up. If the item became damaged or lost. So this is a very, very, very powerful mitzvah. The Talmud even tells us that even though there's only an extent that you have to go to, but yet we find that the sages were extremely diligent about this mitzvah to the utmost extent. For example, well, it says over here that the mitzvah is to return it to your brother, and if it's not somebody you know or you don't know where he is, take it into your home. But we learn out from the verses, we actually, on page 513, we actually learn out that the extent of one's obligation is to protect the item. What does it mean to protect the item? Let's say you found a couple of hens, a couple of chickens. Now, you have no idea who it belongs to. So if you have no idea who it belongs to, this is indefinite, right? Now, chickens require food. You need to keep it going. You need to keep it alive. I mean, just to lock it into a room and they're going to die, then you're obviously not safeguarding it properly, because now you're rendering it worthless, right? You'll have rotten meat by the time he comes. So what's going to be? You're going to have to feed it. Well, feeding it costs money. You're not obligated to invest any money in it. But if the thing is sometimes, if you're going to keep on feeding it, the cost may actually now outweigh the value of the item itself. In such a case, what you do is, if you foresee that, what do you do in such a case? You're not obligated to shell out money from your own pocket. You're not obligated to be paying for someone else's thing. You're obligated to watch it. You're obligated to safeguard it. You're obligated to return it, to make sure it's there, but not to contribute money to his business, to his fund. So the Torah says, then you go and you sell it, and you hold on to the money for the person. And one day when you find the owner, after giving all the signs, and say, oh yeah, these hens were tied up with this red ribbon, and they had this. Oh, I found them. Here's your money. What do you mean here's my money? Where's my chickens? Well, it's 3 years ago. Those chickens would have long been dead by now. You know what I mean? They don't grow long white beards. You know what I mean? They die. Or they're eaten. Or they make good chicken soup. But, yeah. You know what I mean? But, so, and it wouldn't have made sense, practically speaking, for me to keep on feeding those chickens, because it would cost more to feed them for 3 years than they would be worth. So I sold them. Of course, you want to be smart. If you're smart, you don't just sell it on your own volition. You go to the Beit Din, you go to the court, and they authorize it. So this way, there's no question. Did you sell it for the right price? Did you do the right thing, or whatever it is? However, this is as far as obligation goes. But the Talmud actually tells us a story about a great sage that was, in fact, very, very poor. He and his household suffered from poverty. They didn't have much. They had very little, actually. And one time, his children came running in, or his grandchildren it is, he was studying, and they said, look, we found this whole little bundle of hens. Apparently there were two travelers that had sat down outside the gate alongside the road, and they to rest, and they put it down, and they picked up the rest, and they forgot to take this with them, and they'd long left. Now, there was this before GPS tracking, so there was no device on there. And he said, well, and they were excited. Imagine for these little kids, and his wife over at home, now we can have some chicken and this, he found it. And the truth is that technically speaking, you could even have made the arguments based on, without getting into the details of the law, make the argument that, this was lost in a public place. Mm-hmm. There's not much of, intrinsic signs of ownership on them. Mm-hmm. I mean, a hen is a hen. It's not like it's got
can trace the ownership.
It's not traceable, really, right? As much as other items, that have, more specific characteristics. And therefore, your typical person could have made the conclusion right away, even if they asked a rabbi, yeah, you can keep it. The owner may not, in other words, justifiably. And he was right away, no, we can't, I'm sorry, we can't touch it. Kindalach, dear children, this is a lost object. This is a great mitzvah. The mitzvah of Hashavat Abidah, returning a lost object. So now they're going to keep the chickens. So instead of seeing chicken soup, they see live chickens running around. And guess what? They have to feed them. So now a family that's so poor that can barely feed itself, now they have to feed these chickens. And he did it with great diligence. This is a mitzvah. To him, it wasn't just chickens. It was a mitzvah that Hashem had sent his way. As time passed, and it was obvious, and it became very clear that it's becoming too expensive and it's not sustainable, guess what he did? He sold all the chickens. I guess there were many by now. They had hatched, they had laid eggs. It became too much. And he bought goats. Goats. Now, goats do live longer. Goats also produce a little milk so they can kind of sustain themselves. They can pay their own way, so to speak. So it's more sensible, at least financially speaking. But a problem crept up. You know, Rabbi didn't have a pen, to hold goats and stuff. So it was more like in his backyard, in his courtyard. So the neighbors, who were not such good people, started to complain. They made a whole issue about it. Get your goats out of here. Why are you parking on my property and all that stuff? And they came with all kinds of accusations. But the truth is that he would see to it that the goats don't bother anyone. Certainly this rabbi was not one to do a mitzvah on someone else's account. So what would he do? He would take the goats and make sure that they're sent out every day to pasture outside of the town. In a free no man's land. To pasture there and only come back in the evening, so they weren't really bothering anyone. These people were just looking for trouble, they couldn't stand this rabbi and his good deeds, and some people, they just cannot tolerate when someone's doing something good. And they came with accusations that, these goats are a nuisance, and they cause damage, and they're running around, and they're creating problems. And he said to them that these goats are so not a nuisance